I think he will be the top corner drafted. I think everything depends on what Seattle does. I don't put it past Seattle drafting a corner, which means that Detroit might end up with Christian Gonzalez. So maybe my pick will be accurate, right? Who knows? But I think those are two actually really interesting picks to me, because both of those teams, I think, are going to have to make the decision: do we take the best corner that we like, or do we take Jalen Carter? Like, I think Jalen's going to be there, and that's the sweet spot that I'm thinking to myself, like, well, that's when we'll know what they think about Jalen Carter is right there.
Yeah, I mean, why would Devin over Christian maybe fit a little bit better with Detroit?
That's a good question. That's it. I think it's at this point, I would say that, like, Devin's toughness is what's inching him ahead. He's got good length. He was coached by a really quality coach in Ryan Walters, who's now the head coach at Purdue. And what Ryan told me is that Devin is one of the most unique athletes in that as the pressure ratchets up, or there's more talking, or there's more trash talking, he said it's not just that his intensity level goes up. He said his technique actually gets better. And he was like, he's the only guy that I've been around that's the case. It's like he goes into a zone where his technique gets better, and I think that's what NFL teams are starting to recognize, is that at the biggest moments is when he played his cleanest football. And that's a really a rarity, in particular in college at cornerback.
Yeah. If Devin's not there and Jalen's not there, what would Detroit get out of a potential Gonzalez pick?
Well, I love him too, and like it's not a far removal from Devin. Christian's very smooth. He's long. I think that if he played at Oregon for 2 or 3 years, he might even have a better, elevated stature in this draft. Being at Colorado, he's a little bit under the radar, and then everyone's like, oh my gosh, this kid at Oregon is very good. He's got elite ball skills, great lineage. His dad was actually a basketball player at UTEP. He was 6'9", and so he's just a fluid mover. It's really rare to see guys that have that length and then have the athleticism to stay with routes in man coverage. He has a good feel for zone coverage. And Detroit's got to get better on defense, right? I loved the Aiden Hutchinson pick. I really did. I think you guys probably know that. I think they're going to have a chance with the first 4 picks in the top 55 to get significantly better in a year in which Aaron Rodgers just left the division. In my estimation, Detroit should be the favorite in the division next year if they do well in these top 55 picks, in these 4 picks. They need to get a defensive tackle, maybe a Kalijah Cansey from Pitt, who's a productive player on the interior. You pair him with Hutchinson, and now you got a legit pass rush. Maybe you get a Christian Gonzalez in there. Maybe you get a splash running back. Maybe in the first round, maybe in the second round. Detroit's in a great position. If I were to say before the draft, who do you expect to come out of this draft as the team that you're talking about the most? It would be Detroit.
There's a lot of talk about Indy and Levis falling to them in the first round.
Yeah.
Do you think Levis falls to them, or which quarterback do you think falls to them?
Who?
Levis to the Colts.
Colts. So fascinating. I mean, if the smoke is correct, they're going to be staring at C.J. Stroud. If I were the Colts and that happened, you couldn't light a fire under me fast enough to run that card up to take C.J. Stroud. It's not the player you asked me about. I will say that if I had my choice between Anthony Richardson and Will Levis, I would take Anthony Richardson. I think he fits the Colts better. I think Stroud's going to be off the board. Now, if he's not, that's the pick. You run it up there because he's a franchise guy. If not, then you've got to make a decision. I think that Richardson would be better than Levis because he's got way higher upside. You can develop him, and he kind of fits what I think Indianapolis would be good at, which is feature Jonathan Taylor, allow Richardson to even help the run game by holding edges and stretching edges, and then throwing play-action pass, which utilizes his big arm. Having Jonathan Taylor would allow him to develop. That would be the pick for me.
It seems like since Andrew Luck, they haven't had that quarterback
Yeah,
to step
they've
in.
tried.
Yeah, and the defense is kind of shaping up well. What other pieces do they need to kind of make that push again?
I'm gonna give you a total cop out. It doesn't matter until they get the quarterback. That's the foundational piece. So it's the foundation of the house. The other pieces are the framing and the windows, and then even like some of the decor of the house. It doesn't matter. Like, you can't buy windows until you put the foundation down. So until they get the quarterback position right, it doesn't matter what they add.
And switching gears to Kansas City, I know you talked about, like, don't focus on the weakness, focus on the strength.
Yeah.
So what are they going to need to kind of go for a repeat?
I would lean into having Patrick Mahomes. Why not, give him another offensive player? And like I said, like the back of the draft is going to be interesting of the first round, just because I do think that there's going to be some movement, and there's going to be some players that are, I would call them specialized players. Like, for instance, in the wide receiver class, you've got very specific outside receivers and very specific slot receivers. And because of that, I think you're going to have some of them fall down. I think the Chiefs are going to have a chance to take a really good slot receiver, and that's where I would lean. Maybe I'm just a total offensive honk, but I want to see Mahomes with a guy like Flowers out there and see what he can do.
Maybe another tackle, that tackle too, or is that
Potentially, and at that point, maybe an Anton Harrison, from Oklahoma. Maybe if you want to protect a little bit more. I'm hearing his name more and more as a guy that could get into the first round, the back end of the first round. I do think in the middle of the first round, we're going to see a little bit of a run on offensive tackles. So you'll see the Darnell Wrights and Broderick Joneses and Paris Johnsons of the world. Yeah.
We talked a lot about Devin Witherspoon. He has two teammates
Yeah.
who might go Friday.
Quan and Sydney, right? Yeah.
What do you think of those two?
They're so good. So good. My favorite film, other than the quarterbacks and other than Bijan, I'm trying to think of it, and other than Tyree Wilson, was watching the Illinois secondary. They were so experienced, so in sync with one another, tough, physical. They were just really good. I mean, they should have won that division. I mean, they should have beat Michigan that day, save for a couple of calls that didn't go their way. Sydney is the type of guy that he'll be one of the toughest players on your team the minute he steps into the locker room. The way their coaches said it is like, nobody tried Sydney, right? And it's like, that mentality permeated the defense. I think that he can play multiple positions in the secondary, meaning like he can give you a little slot corner, he can give you a little free safety and drop down, but I think he's best when he's just in kind of an in-the-box strong safety. And then Quan is an interesting, in fact, when I talked with their coaching staff, they said, like, Devin's really good, but we didn't know who was going to get selected higher. Now, Devin has kind of rocketed up the charts, but I know that they hold Quan in very high esteem.
I know you've done a few Illinois games. Like, these are guys.
I actually haven't.
Not last year. Did you see
I didn't.
this coming before that, or no?
I can't lie to you and say, like, yeah, I saw, so I didn't. I will say, and especially when they lost to, I think it was, please correct me if I'm wrong, I believe they lost to Indiana early in the season. Isn't that right? And I was like, wait, and I kind of stopped. I just was like, well, I'm not going to see Illinois now. But then as the season went along and I started preparing for more games, I started seeing them on film, and I was like, man, this is just, it was just built so correctly. We're going to protect a really good defense by running the hell out of the ball with Chase. And they were able to do that. They got caught against Michigan, and again, like some bad calls, but the hard part is they lost that entire secondary, and that's a really tough thing to overcome. You bet.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm
Sorry,
doing
I
wonderful.
got a
Don't.
ACL strain,
Are
and
you
I
okay?
tore my meniscus.
Do you really?
Yeah,
I've torn
I
my
can't-
meniscus. It's no fun.
I can't slide into somebody's anymore.
Me neither, if that helps you out at all.
Yeah, Klatt's in the meat up.
Oh, man.
Hey, Adi Tamulai, he had the,
From Northwestern.
right,
Yeah.
and he had that great 40-yard dash,
Yeah.
280-yard dash. Did his stock go up?
I think so. I think so. I'm going to pull up exactly what I wrote about him because I really like him.
I do too. He's from Kansas City, well, Nigeria, but went to North Kansas City High School, then Northwestern. And all of a sudden, his name comes up because he ran, he tied a record for a 280-pound guy.
So he ran sub 4.5. And what I thought was interesting about it is I thought watching him that he could move inside as well. I'm like, I think he could play tackle. I'm like, how does a tackle run sub 4.5? I know he was a really good shot putter in high school. Big physical presence. I think when you line him up on the outside, he can line up and just stop the outside run game if he's head up on the tight end. He's a really durable player. I don't think he missed a start in his last 3 years. And Pat speaks glowingly about him. And that's always, listen, like, Pat's one of those guys I really trust in college football. And when he tells me something about a player, I believe it. And he loved this kid. He said, like, he was, how did he put it to me? He rebuilt the chemistry in our locker room.
Oh, cool.
And that speaks volumes to me. So when you've got a guy that is this physically gifted, can play multiple positions along the defensive line, and can be that much of a glue piece in the locker room, I think that there's a lot of value. I have him, if I'm not mistaken, he's my 66th rated player in the draft. So I don't think he's going to be a first rounder, but I do think he's got a chance to be a second round pick.
Let me ask you about rounds. You look at the Chiefs do great in late rounds. They got Pacheco in the 7th.
Yeah.
Of course, Brady was in the 6th. Trey Smith in the 6th. Brock Purdy was the 7th. It seems the later rounds are with some of these great gems of them. Is this a draft that can produce the kind of gems that we've seen coming out of later rounds?
Absolutely. There's no doubt in my mind. While it might not be the most top-heavy draft I've ever seen, right? And you'll hear that, like maybe 15, maybe 20 first-round grades. There are guys that you're going to hear called in the last few. I'll give you an example. Jaron Hall, a quarterback from BYU, right? Like, he could be a Brock Purdy type. I think that Stetson Bennett could be that. Jake Haener could be that. Aiden O'Connell could be that at the quarterback position. I look at running backs. You said Isaiah Pacheco. There's a backup running back from Texas named Roshan Johnson. I love it. And people might be like, well, he wasn't even the starter. He's a good player. He's a very good player. Kendry Miller, the running back from TCU. Who's another one? Deuce Vaughn. Someone's going to draft Deuce Vaughn. And he's probably going to get taken 3 rounds later than he should just because of his size. And he's going to roll in there. And I just have the sense like we're going to be sitting here in 2033 and we're going to be like, of course Deuce Vaughn was a 10-year player. Of course he was, because it makes too much sense. So to answer your question, yes, I do think that there's a lot of value in the middle and late in the draft, even on defense as well. I'll give you another one on defense. How about Jair Brown, the safety from Penn State?
Okay.
These are names that I really believe will be starters in the NFL at some point. Maybe not all those quarterbacks, but all these other guys. And you're going to get them without a lot of fanfare in the middle or late part of the draft.
So what should the Chiefs do? I personally like DeWante Jones.
Okay.
I like a man who's a massive person.
He's huge, yeah.
And doesn't give up
He's like
sacks.
6'9".
Right. He
Good
just
basketball
stands
player in
there
high
and
school.
Can block. Patrick can run all behind him because he's so big.
Yeah.
I like him. But who would you pick?
Well, as an old quarterback, I would rather have the pass catcher than the pass protector.
Okay.
But maybe that's just, I always just look at the flash. Either one of those would be a really good pick.
Wide receiver or offensive
Or
lineman?
tackle. I do think, I would value a guy like Zay Flowers over DeWan Jones.
Okay.
Okay, so just on my board, and it comes down to that. Now, there might be a scenario where a tight end that they really like is available, and they could be looking at a guy like Kelsey and his age and saying, we need the heir apparent at the tight end position because that's been such an important part of our offense. Could that be a Luke Musgrave from Oregon State? That's an interesting. Michael Mayer, I doubt he would make it all the way there, the Notre Dame tight end, but maybe it's a tight end. Could be an offensive tackle. I think Anton Harrison is a name I've heard more than DeJuan Jones, even though you love his size. Anton Harrison is a guy out of Oklahoma that is getting a lot of talk right now in the league. So I think all of those places could be an interesting place.
My last question.
Yeah.
Does the league look at Brett Beach differently now? I mean, he first was a scout and scouted out, our quarterback. But then last year, all his draft picks made it.
Yeah.
And all the draft picks that were in the Super Bowl. And he just has seemed to hit the jackpot the last couple of years. So does the league look at Brett Beach not just as the yes man for Andy, but as a really shrewd NFL brain?
I think so. I think that comes, with the hardware. They've won 2 Super Bowls now, So all due respect to the guys that haven't won 2 Super Bowls, it's like, you're not as good as this guy is. A lot of it is hitting on the quarterback. I just talked about in a different answer, quarterback having to be the foundation. He clearly is the best player in the league. And then fit has so much to do with it. Fit is so important. And I think that the best decision makers, what they do is that they identify the players that will fit them the best. Maybe they're not the most coveted prospect at that time, place and time in the draft, but man, for this moment, for the players that are available, we're going to take the guy that fits us the best. That was Isaiah Pacheco. He just fit them the best. And I think that's what Brett has done really well over the last few years, is identify the type of player that can fit the system, whether it's defensively or offensively, so that they can plug in and actually contribute.
You are so good.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it. I hope your knee feels better.
It's getting there.
Okay, good.
You have to stay off it.
Yeah.
So this setup isn't that
I've
great.
been there. Hi there. How are you, man? Great to see you as well.
All that partying we did in Vegas.
That's right. That's right.
How's everything going on?
I'm doing well.
We keep talking about the big 4 at quarterback, but there's a guy that really stands out to me. Jake Hendon. What are your thoughts about the Fresno State?
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of Jake. His toughness. I just keep going back to the 2021 UCLA game when he just willed his team to a victory on the road. He is very smart, understands offensive football. I think if he was at a bigger school, if he would have transferred or stayed at Washington or been I think that he would be a higher rated prospect, to be quite honest with you. And he's easily the type of guy. Let's just say, if you were to ask me, of the middle round quarterbacks or the guys that are not up at the top of the draft, who would you bet on to succeed in the league? It would be Jake Hendon.
That's exactly how I feel about it. Now, let's talk about the big 4. Which one stands out to you? Bryce, CJ?
Well, I would say, for me, it's hard to separate CJ and Bryce. They're the 2 best quarterbacks in the draft. And then for me, there's actually a pretty substantial gap between them and Anthony Richardson. And then between Richardson, there's a little bit more of a gap. And then my debate is actually not Will Levis, is he as good as C.J. Stroud? It's, would I take Hendon Hooker or Will Levis? And that's just the way that I evaluate them. Bryce is an unbelievable point guard on grass, distributor of the football, processes information so quickly, born leader, prepared, everything, very accurate with the ball, anticipatory thrower. CJ's similar to that. He's probably got a little bit better arm, better understanding of trajectory. His ball placement is exquisite. He processes information on the football field way better than what this test is trying to tell me that he does, right? So those 2 are up there. And then Richardson's upside is just so high. I would say he's a bit like a Rubik's Cube. If you can figure him out and you can unlock that Rubik's Cube, then he would be a top 4 player in the league. And then after that, you get back down to Levis and Hendon Hooker, which one do you like? And I think that would have to do with the individual meetings, because it's hard for me to separate the 2 out.
And which receiver stands out to you that can be a day 1 guy? Day 1 impact, he gets 7 catches week 1, everybody's taking him on the fantasy team.
Jackson Smith-Njigba. He is, to me, he's the best receiver in the draft. We forget that in 2021, he was the best player on an offense that included Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. And he was the best wide receiver in the room. He's the type of player I don't think he's going to be the best receiver in the NFL, but I do think, in the same vein as a Cooper Kupp or even an Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think he's got the ability to lead the league in receptions because of what he does, how he specializes in space, creates space, understands defensive structure, understands how to tempo his routes in order to give the best look possible to his quarterback. He's a phenomenal player.
Now, the quarterback position, what are your thoughts on that? It looks like you got about 4 or 5 guys that are projected in the top 15. Do you feel like that's the premier position in this year's
No, I think that the premier position is at edge rusher in this draft. Even though we don't have like a Chase Young or a Bosa type in this draft, the depth of this draft is at edge rusher and then at corner. Those are the 2 positions that stand out to me.
Over under on your Colorado bus. We're 5.5. Where we going?
Oh, wins or draft picks?
Wins.
I'm going over, man. Come on, let's go. Transfers? Over 60. Wins? Over. I'm going to take the over the 5, man.
Ball game?
I hope so.
Bowl game.
I think so. I mean, here's what people say. Like, everyone's saying, like, they're all leaving. They were 1-11. They were awful. And I don't want to disparage. I hope all the kids that leave find a spot and have success. Truly, I would have hated to be a part of, this whole process. But having said that, they are upgrading. Like, why do you bring in 60 new players? Because they're better, right? And I think that that's the case.
That's perfect. Thank
Yeah,
you so much.
you got it.